there once existed a planet known as Krypton, a planet that burned like a green star in the distant heavens. There, civilization was far advanced and had brought forth a race of supermen whose mental and physical powers were developed to the absolute peak of human perfection. But there came a day when giant quakes threatened to destroy Krypton forever. One of the planet's leading scientists, sensing the approach of doom, placed his infant son in a small rocket ship and sent it hurtling in the direction of the Earth just as Krypton exploded. The rocket ship sped through star-studded space, landing safely on Earth with its precious burden, Krypton's sole survivor. A passing motorist found the uninjured child and took it to an orphanage. As the years went by and the child grew to maturity, he found himself possessed of amazing physical powers. Faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, able to leap tall buildings at a single bound. The infant of Krypton is now the man of steel, Superman.
Superman's really changed since the 1940s. But he's a hero. I mean, he possesses superpowers and he harnesses them in support of truth and justice, and they've scrubbed that out of this one, the American way. I mean, Superman is one of the good guys. He stands against evil and he fights for those people who can't fight for themselves, and he protects everything that's good and right. And you're supposed to admire him, and you're supposed to sleep better at night knowing that he's on guard duty watching over our world, because it's a good world, but it's threatened by a few evil people. Unfortunately, Superman is a fictional character. In the past, God spoke to our ancestors through the prophets at many times and in various ways. But in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, and through whom also he made the universe. The Son is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being, sustaining all things by his powerful word. After he had provided purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven. So he became as much superior to the angels as the name he has inherited is superior to theirs. The writer wants us to know that Jesus is a hero. He's a sort of Superman in our cultural conception, somebody who possesses superpowers, the very powers of God himself. And he is here to stand up for us and to protect us from the evil that just crawls through the world looking to ruin us. To the ancients, the prophets were sort of Supermen. God spoke to them. God empowered them. Think about Elijah and Elisha and all of the great, amazing things they did. Elijah confronting the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel and building an altar and preparing a sacrifice and pouring water onto the altar until finally it was soaked and the water was running down the altar and standing in a pool all around the foot of the altar. And Elijah prays this very simple prayer: Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, that I'm your servant and have done all these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God and that you're turning their hearts back again. And fire came down and struck the altar and burned up the rocks and lapped up all of the water in the trench. And then there was Elisha, met by the citizens of Jericho, who cried that their water had been contaminated, had become contaminated, the spring that they got their water from. It was dangerous to drink. It killed all their crops. So Elisha threw salt in the spring. It's kind of unexpected when you're thinking about purifying something, but to throw salt in the spring, and the water suddenly flowed pure and sweet. And the Bible says in 2 Kings 2:22, the water has remained pure to this day, according to the word Elisha had spoken. A woman came crying to Elisha, my husband's died. And you know that he was a man of God, but now my creditors are coming to settle up, and they're about to seize my 2 sons and sell them into slavery to pay off my debts. And Elisha told her to gather all the pots and pans she could find and take them to her house and start pouring oil into them. And the oil kept on filling the pans and never running out until finally somebody said, "Here's the last one." And the oil stopped, and the woman sold the oil and paid all her debts. Another woman came to respect Elisha. She talked her husband into preparing a room so that when Elisha came by occasionally on his circuit rounds, as he looked over Israel and worked in Israel, he would have a place to stay. And in his gratitude, Elisha promised that she would bear a son. And she said, "Oh, no, please, don't play games with me. I've longed for a son for so long." But sure enough, she had a son. But one day, the son was out with the reapers, and he began complaining about his head hurting. And he died. And when Elisha heard, he came running and raised the boy from the dead. And as amazing as that was, even after Elisha had died, a group of men were going to the cemetery to bury a friend. And a group of raiders surprised them there in the cemetery. And in their haste to run, they just took the body and threw it into the cave where Elisha's body had been buried. And as soon as the dead body touched Elisha's bones, it came to life again and went home. Those were the prophets. Those were their powers as God spoke at various times and in various measures to them. But they are all dead and they're all gone, as great as they were. But there's Jesus, the Son, the heir of all things. Now you understand that doesn't mean that God has died and left Jesus his stuff. That's usually what we think about when we talk about inheritance. But it's really a way of telling you how powerful Jesus is and what an exalted person he is. Any king anywhere has a story about how some god or other had chosen him and had given him all this territory to rule over. "I am his son," he said, "and he gave me all of you as my possession." And everyone bowed down and said, "Oh, the heir of all things." You see, Jesus is not just telling stories. He is God's son, and God has appointed him heir of all things. He owns it all. And if that's not all, if that's not enough, Jesus made it all. He is the radiance of God's glory, sort of like looking at the sun. You know, you can't look at the sun directly, but you can see its radiance and you can enjoy the beauty of the sun and know that that's derived from the sun. And here is Jesus. The author says Jesus is the way that God is made visible. And you notice I didn't say a way God is made visible. I said the way that God is made visible. You know, sometimes we think we can kind of look at the world and we can know God. We can find out about God. We can see God. I saw God in the sunset. I saw God in the beauty of the mountains. I saw God in the beauty of the desert. But we never really look at nature and see God himself. We see something, I think we sense something about his power, about his beauty, I suppose, but never really seeing God. Besides, what we forget is that we're part of nature, and nobody would ever say, "Let's look at us and see what God looks like." When you're looking at Jesus, though, you're looking at what God is, because he is the exact representation of his being. The Hebrew writer says he is the character of his hypostasios. And that's a real important phrase in Greek philosophy, because Jesus is the exact reproduction of what God is in himself. That word hypostasios means the essence of something, or what it really is made of, or what it really stands for. And when you look at Jesus, you see what God really is. You see what makes God God. You know, you might think, if you read the Old Testament from kind of a surface way, that the essence of God is to kill people. If you make God angry, he kills you. If you violate his law, he kills you. If you touch something that belongs to him, he kills you. But Jesus shows the substance of God. He shows the essence of who God is within himself. He shows the love that reaches out to all of us who have rebelled against him to forgive us and to reconcile us to him so that we can be friends. And so the writer says, Jesus is not about destroying, but he is about sustaining all things by his powerful word. And that's why his word is so important. That's why we need to hang on his every word. That's why we ought to trust him and do everything that he says. Not because he is intent on destroying us if we don't do what he says exactly as he says, but because in Jesus everything about God that is good has come true. And in the word of Jesus is the truth that God wants to be reconciled to us, wants to bless us and wants to be with us. And so Jesus, this Son through whom God is working, Jesus has provided purification for sin. And that's really the essence of God. That's what makes God tick. The purification of sin and drawing people back into fellowship with Him, drawing people back into a love relationship with Himself. And I tell you, that's the work of a true, real, existing superhero. Then He sat down at the right hand of the Majesty in heaven, and I see the writer, as he speaks to his people, take the mic and just drop it. Enough said. Although, as a good preacher, he goes on for 12 more chapters because, well, he's a good preacher. He wants to develop the meaning of all of this for daily living. What are our lives going to look like since all of this is true? Let's go to Hebrews chapter 2, beginning in verse 5. It is not to angels that He has subjected the world to come, about which we're speaking, but there is a place where someone has testified, "What is mankind that you are mindful of them, a son of man that you care for them? You made them a little lower than the angels. You crowned them with glory and honor and put everything under their feet. In putting everything under them, God left nothing that's not subject to them. Yet at present we do not see everything subject to them, but we do see Jesus, who was made lower than the angels for a little while, now crowned with glory and honor because He suffered death, so that by the grace of God He might taste death for everyone. In bringing many sons and daughters to glory, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the pioneer of their salvation perfect through what He suffered. Both the one who makes people holy and those who are made holy are of the same family. So Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. He says, I will declare your name to my brothers and sisters. In the assembly, I will sing your praises. First, there is that rush of possibility. Here is what human beings were created to be. You've made them a little lower than the angels. You crowned them with glory and honor and put everything under their feet. I mean, who hasn't felt the rush of being a human being, recognizing how great and noble and powerful it is to be a human being? Whether it be on some bright, crisp morning and you get up and you stretch and you think about how good life is and you think, man, what a great day. I'm going to do great things today. Or maybe you read some futurist talking about inventions and about the innovations that are being worked on right now and the possibility for just all kinds of wonderful things happening in the very short future. The ability to feed every single person in the world cheaply and efficiently. Maybe even to cure some of the most horrible diseases you can imagine. Or maybe even to go out into the outer space, into space and see other worlds and even to live there. I mean, God said it was our destiny to fill the earth and subduing it, and we're doing it. Humans are great, and they're smart, and they're capable of so many great things, and sometimes we touch that and think, wow, we know exactly what the psalmist was singing about. And then comes the crash of reality. War and murder and oppression and torture, and babies die, and people still suffer, and death. Death that represents sort of everything that we face that is humiliating and lowly and degrading, the weakness and the futility and the frustration and the hurt and the grief and the despair. Death still reigns. You crown them with glory and honor and put everything under their feet, and about all we can do is say, ha! But, and the writer doesn't really throw in the strong adversative conjunction in Greek. That's the word Allah. And it means but. Here's the way it was, but. He uses the weaker conjunction, the weaker adversative conjunction. It's de, and it means but. He starts off sort of quietly. And he's kind of gentle with this softer conjunction. Well, we see the one who was made a little lower than the angels, Jesus, now crowned with glory and honor because he suffered death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. You see, there's a crescendo there, where he starts off talking about being a little lower than the angels, and suddenly he is at this great space, crowned with glory and honor because of the suffering of death, the frustration of being less than we were created to be, to Jesus, the one who has freed us to live life far above the ordinary. The writer says he tasted death on our behalf. And that doesn't mean that he only died a little. I mean, what in the world would that mean anyway? I heard a girl tell me one time, she said, I'm a little pregnant. And I thought, what does that mean? You either are or you aren't, you know, and that's kind of the way it is with dead. You're either alive or you're dead. You're not somewhere in between. The writer says he suffered death, but he tasted death for everyone. You ever tasted spaghetti? You can't taste spaghetti by getting just a little bit of it. I mean, those spaghetti worms are slithering all over your plate, and they're covered up by that bloody-looking stuff, tomato sauce, you know, and you have to roll them up somehow on a fork and make this big wad out of them, and you put this big wad of slithering stuff in your mouth, and in there the worms start to crawl around, you know, those tasteless, slimy worms, and you get a mouthful of all of that tomato sauce kind of ruined by copious doses of oregano, and you sort of gag before you swallow it and spit it out. At least that's what I do. Jesus tasted death. He suffered death, but he spit it out so that we too only have to taste death. And it has a bitter taste, doesn't it? But we're not bound to swallow it. We will spit it out just like Jesus did, because Jesus did. Do you see how Jesus has changed the focus here? Instead of concentrating on death and having all that suffering kind of bleed out our joy and security and our satisfaction, now we center on life and all of its possibilities. Because even if death does get in the way for a little while, it is over as fast as you can spit it out. I have a friend who's suffering from cancer, and he feels awful. His body is right now being eaten up by a monster that is right now out of control. But he took me out to his shop one day, and he showed me an old 57 Chevy. And he said, "This is my project. I am determined to do one thing to it a day." And he said, "I am determined to finish this project." You see, he has chosen to focus on life instead of death. Now, I can envision two ways this is going to turn out. One is that he is healed as I continue to pray, and he finishes the project. The other one is that he isn't healed, but God, in that instant that he dies, or at least it seems like only an instant, raises him from the dead and takes him out to this wonderful shop where a broken down old 57 Chevy sits, and he says, "Here, finish what you started." Jesus, who is the hero who makes life possible, life above the ordinary, while you're alive now, and when you taste death, you're alive forever. Let's stand and let's sing. If you need to come to Jesus this morning, would you please come?